All right. We are live today with Travis Nielsen, who comes to us by way of Red Hat and is the creator of Rook and works on the Ceph team there at Red Hat. Travis, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, hi Eric. Great to be with you. Good to be on the show.
This is one of our first kind of fan mail introductions. So we have a common acquaintance who is a user of Rook and at a big American corporate company that I was talking to recently, and they requested that we get the story of Rook from Travis himself on Contributor. So thanks for obliging, Travis.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about Rook. If someone wants to get me talking, that's what you asked me about. So,
yeah, there you go. So let's, as we always do, let's level set with the group and our listeners and explain to us what Rook is. And I imagine you may have to cover a bit of Ceph, and then we'll start there.
Okay, this is a good time to share some slides just to set that context. So the slides I've got here are from my KubeCon talk that's going to be officially next week. Well, I don't know how that relates to when this podcast comes out, but yeah. So these slides are from KubeCon. It's just from a quick, here's what Rook is, here's what it's all about, why people care about Rook. So the first question I always like to ask is, well, what is about storage anyway? Who needs storage? Why is storage so important? So when I talk about this, I'm talking about for Kubernetes deployments. So Kubernetes being that basic distributed platform for deploying your applications in the cloud or on-prem, wherever you have Kubernetes running. The question is, well, what do I do for storage, right? And Rook is all about bringing storage to Kubernetes. So I guess I'll get to that more in a bit. But so storage, I mean, if you're running in a cloud provider, so you're up in AWS, you're in Google Cloud, Azure, wherever, in those clouds, they provide storage for you. They've got EBS and anyway, all sorts of storage solutions. Now, if you go into your own data center, you don't have all of these nice cloud services that are so conveniently available and dynamic and all of that. So you have to provision your own bare metal servers or VMs or whatever, but you can't just say attach this disk and that's all you need. Like, you need the storage to be all durable and suffer outages of nodes and or even data centers, right? You want your storage to be durable. So storage is not something that's deployed with Kubernetes, but it's something that's traditionally kind of this external plugin. You go buy an appliance and you connect your cluster to it. You go, or if you're in the cloud, again, you connect to that cloud provider storage. But so why does it have to be that way? Why not manage the storage just like any other Kubernetes application? But you want to do it on a time-tested platform that you can trust. Right? You don't want to somebody to just build a new data platform, because you probably shouldn't trust your data with a new platform that's just come out.
Well, and maybe you'll get into this, Travis, but the original Kubernetes vision, if I remember correctly, was kind of stateless by design. That was like we're gonna ignore storage, and that gives us horizontal scalability and all these benefits, and so maybe that's part of the reason that here we are, years into Kubernetes and still haven't really solved storage. I don't know if that's part of the role.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't really go into that, but Kubernetes was designed for stateless applications because of all those things you mentioned. And the reason is storage is a really hard problem, and they knew they couldn't solve it initially. But the second you start running all your stateless applications, well, you can't run very long or very interesting applications that are actually stateless. You need state. You need to store your data somewhere. So with Rook, then, in the early days, we said, hey, we need to make storage natively available to your Kubernetes cluster. It should look like any other Kubernetes application, and it can run alongside all of your applications. We still want to consume it just like any other storage, with the CSI plugins, that's the way you plug in your storage, but that storage doesn't need to be external to Kubernetes, is the point. It can be inside the same cluster. But in order to accomplish that now, we really need automated management, which means, okay, the way you automate things in Kubernetes is you have a Kubernetes operator, and then you have CRDs that define the state for the application, right? So fundamentally, that's how something becomes Kubernetes native, is if it's deployed automatically, but you can also tell Kubernetes how to deploy it with this desired state. I guess we call it with the CRDs. CRDs, well, it's short for custom resource definitions, and they really just define sort of the schema or for the settings you need to apply for whatever application. And specifically, an operator is this pod that's running, this automation that looks at those settings in the CRDs and then goes and applies those settings to make it happen.
Okay, this is the configuration for the deployment.
Yeah, when you create something, you create an application in Kubernetes, you're telling it, hey, go create this resource, create this pod, create this service, and you do it very declaratively. So the CRDs let you declare some other type of application. So for Rook, we have these CRDs where you tell Kubernetes, hey, create these things, and that's how you start Rook in this declarative way. And then Rook automates going and applying that configuration to your cluster. It manages upgrades, it manages a lot of the complexities of storage that people just don't want to think about. Well, it's really complicated, so they shouldn't have to think about it. So then the last bullet there, ultimately, I mean, we looked at Ceph as a stable data platform. We said, hey, Ceph's been around for a long time. It's been in production for, since what year? Around 2012, I think, going on 10 years in production now. And it provides this data platform we need. And we said, okay, let's bring Ceph into Kubernetes. Let's deploy Ceph as a Kubernetes application, run the Ceph daemons as pods, create all the other resources we need. And Ceph plus Kubernetes equals Rook. That's how I like to say it. We're managing storage for Kubernetes.
Yeah, Travis, when I think of Kubernetes, I think about the ability to survive failure. You know, you can lose nodes and the application lives on, spawns new nodes as necessary, or I don't know if that's if I'm using the right nouns, but we'll spawn new instances. And how does that work with storage? Because I'm kind of imagining that is the storage kind of getting tossed around in order to ensure that it's always going to exist in the event of an instance failure?
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to design storage for Kubernetes, that means it has to be fault tolerant. If a node goes down or you lose a whole node, your data is still safe in the cluster because there are multiple replicas of the data. Or it's erasure coded, which means it's broken up into pieces and has redundancy built in through some complicated algorithms. But yeah, ultimately you can lose nodes, you can lose individual disks, and Ceph and Rook know how to go repair that and make sure it stays safe. So you bring up a new node, you bring up new disks, and Rook and Ceph recover. A little history here, I guess, on Rook. So we declared Rook stable with Ceph back in December 2018. So going on our third year here. There's many people running it in production. Because it is open source, I don't even really know how many people or exactly what scenarios, but there are a lot. It surprises me how many people out there are running Rook clusters with hundreds of nodes, multiple petabytes of data. And yeah, I'm just excited how often I get to hear about people running it in production.
I like to make sure I leave bugs in my open source so that I hear, so that my users will reach. It's kind of like an analytics measure. They'll reach out, let me know they're using it,
Right. Yeah. Most people only reach out when there's a problem, right?
That's
So you
right.
gotta,
Exactly.
yeah, there are definitely always bugs to go find, and everybody else find them. So yeah, it's a little bit more about Ceph, what Ceph is as a data platform. So Ceph provides the three basic different kinds of storage. So you've got block storage, which means generally used as a read write once volume in Kubernetes, just one pod attached to a single volume. There's the shared file system, or read write many, which might be shared by many pods. And then there's the object storage, or an S3 endpoint that Ceph can provide. And yeah, so Ceph provides the data layer for all of these, and underneath the covers stores them all in a consistent format in what we call the OSDs in Ceph, the object storage daemons. But yeah, that's what we liked about Ceph. One platform for all these three types of storage. Yeah, how's the community looking? So we are a CNCF graduated project now. I think we'll talk more about that later. And it's exciting to see all the GitHub stars and downloads from Docker Hub, and how many people contributing, really. So yeah, that's kind of the overall statistics review of this for you. I've always wondered where those downloads come from. Like, wow, who's actually downloading this thing millions of times?
Maybe you're in a test. Yeah, you're in a test suite somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I know there is a lot of CI use case to pull this, but still,
Yeah.
with a lot of pulls. What else we got here? Oh, kind of the project philosophy. As a project, in Rook, we really do like to put community first. I mean, that's everybody that works on it. We want to hear from the community. What features do people want? What bugs are they seeing? We want to go fix them and get releases out regularly, so that people can keep it running in production, and have a stable storage solution. It is open source with Apache 2.0 license, and we do quarterly releases with regular patch releases. Currently, we've got maintainers from 4 companies, so Cloudicals, Cybosu, Red Hat, and Upbound. Just to get back to the question of where Rook runs, so it really is wherever Kubernetes is deployed, that's where Rook can manage storage with Ceph. Okay, so if you're running in your own data center with bare metal or VMs, Rook can consume raw devices or local PVs in that environment. Or if you're running in the cloud, Rook can actually consume cloud provider PVs in order to overcome limitations of the cloud provider storage. Like, I think the cloud providers have limitations of like 32 volumes per node, things like that. But Ceph doesn't have any of that limit. You can have hundreds or thousands of PVs in your cluster, no matter how small or large. You can get the same performance characteristics too that come from the underlying PVs in the cloud provider. Yep. So that's the environments in a nutshell. And then one last slide here for kind of a high-level architecture view. So I mean, Rook is the management layer for Ceph, and then the CSI driver is what actually provisions and then mounts the storage to the application pods. And finally, Ceph actually provides the data layer. So anytime you're reading and writing data from your application, it goes straight to Ceph, and Rook is out of the picture at that point. Rook is just managing the higher level in order to get Ceph going. But ultimately, Ceph is this stable data layer.
Good. Well, so Travis, help us. Some of us now that we know what Rook is and we're reminded of Ceph. How did this come to be? Like, what? We talked a little about the motivation. Did you personally run into some of these needs?
Maybe I'll go way back. Tell me if it's too far. But
yeah, let's go way back.
It's a lot of fun history here, as I was thinking today. So back in like 2004, I was a lot earlier in my career. I started at Microsoft out in Seattle, and I was on the team with a couple of guys, Bassam and Jared, were their names, and we were on the Windows Server team. So we dealt some with storage. That wasn't my primary focus, but anyway, Windows Server and server environments was what I worked on. Well, over time, so 2011, then I left Microsoft and went and joined a startup doing storage that Bassam had gone and started, and Jared had gone with him as well a couple of years before I got there. So I joined that. That startup was called Simform. You probably never heard of it, but it was kind of a distributed storage solution across, or peer-to-peer storage solution across the internet, which is really cool architecturally.
Yeah.
And so worked on that for a while. Then in 2014, we got acquired by Corporation. So Jared, Bassam, and I were still there. And at Quantum, we were really part of the architecture team to kind of plan, well, what's next with storage? What should the company take a bet on for storage? And so then, as we were researching it, that's where we started looking at Ceph really closely and saying, okay, we really see Ceph as a good solid foundation. Let's go start prototyping, working with it. And Bassam was he's the head architect, the head thinker. So, and Jared and I, anyway, we're right there with him, but I have to give credit to Bassam for coming up with all the big ideas. So we started to put together this project with Ceph, and we thought, well, how can we deploy Ceph for cloud native environments? Kubernetes was just really young at that point and not a big thing. So we thought we were trying to build something even independent from Kubernetes.
Right.
We built it on etcd, and it was really turning into a nightmare trying to manage our own platform on etcd, a distributed storage application, which was a lot of fun. But at some point we realized, okay, Kubernetes really does have the support we need as a storage application to run the storage. So we took a bet on Kubernetes itself. And, well, let me back up a second. I guess we decided to open source Rook after we created it in 2016. And then we went to KubeCon. I think that was our first conference we really went to. It was KubeCon Seattle in November 2016. Wow, that long ago already. And only 1,000 people were there. Now KubeCon's like 12,000, however many people. And at that conference, we learned about operators and CRDs. It was basically a new concept. Well, they weren't called CRDs back then, but this new concept coming out. And we thought, oh, well, that's what we need to do for Ceph. We need to build an operator and just make it work natively with Kubernetes. And then, so a few months later, in our 0.3 release, early 2017, Rook was really born at that point. Before that, it was just a nice idea, I think, or hadn't really found its place. But yeah, we really focused on Kubernetes at that point. And so Bassam, Jared, and I were the primary creators of this project.
And remind us, you were at Red Hat this whole time, and Bassam was at a startup, right?
No, so let me clarify that. So I was not at Red Hat yet.
Okay.
And so we were at Quantum Corporation during this time of actually creating Rook and going and first open sourcing it and creating the operator and things. So we were still all on the same team at the same company there.
Okay. And what was the aspirations for Rook? I mean, certainly you had this is worthy of your time. This would be a big deal. And as you open source it, are you looking for new users? Are you looking? What was kind of the goal or the hope?
The goal or the hope? Yeah. Well, we really had a vision. Again, back to Bassam coming with the vision. It's like, okay, things that are open source really have a much better chance for succeeding, because open source, you get community members coming, other people can contribute, people believe in it more because they can contribute and fix their own bugs even. And Ceph being open source underneath Rook as well, kind of built with that synergy. And so open source, community first, we really wanted to have this community project or an upstream project then. And we started also in parallel building a downstream product at Quantum that would be something where, we ship you an appliance type of solution where you plug in the storage to Kubernetes, and this product would help you even provide more UI and management on top of what Rook was providing, and be this product around Rook. That product never came into fruition, but that was the goal of the initial thing. Like, you got an upstream project and then the downstream product that our company and other companies eventually create.
And eventually, maybe just to round out the history, eventually you made your way to Red Hat.
Right. So let's see, what was it? So it was just over 3 years ago, 2018, where Rook was progressing, building community and all that. And Quantum decided actually that funding was out for our project of kind of the future of storage for Quantum. So they decided to cut our team, and so we dispersed. that event around February 2018, is where I took a look around and I said, hey, I really like this Rook project. The community has really picked it up. We had just barely donated it, finished that process to donate to CNCF. So CNCF officially had ownership of the project, which was good timing for us. And given our close relationship with Ceph and the bet we'd taken on Ceph, I thought, hey, I'm going to go talk to the Ceph team. And it worked out. I joined the Ceph team right after that to continue working on Rook full time. And I saw that as an important step because we did feel like we were lacking a bit in having deep Ceph knowledge trying to deploy Rook in Ceph, because we did things how we thought, but we didn't have any direct team members who really knew Ceph deeply. So around that same time, Red Hat and the Ceph team basically made a bet, like, yeah, Rook, it looks like it's the right thing to do. And so it kind of worked out timing wise. So I joined the team and we continued the project on the same.
And Red Hat saying that Rook is the right thing to do was not obvious in part because there's a few other kind of storage solutions out there in open source, if I recall.
Yeah, there's a lot of open source solutions out there. There's the CNCF has storage projects in various stages of incubation or sandbox and incubation too.
Yeah.
And even at Red Hat, there were multiple storage solutions, like with Gluster and Ceph.
Yep.
And so the Ceph team specifically had said they'd tried some things out with Helm charts, and before they took the bet on Rook. Yeah. And it's like, Helm just isn't quite dynamic enough for us. We really need an operator, and Rook is the operator. And so, at KubeCon Austin in 2017, right before all this went down, where I joined Red Hat, that's when we kind of started discussions with them, and we're showing the Ceph team how great Rook would be for Ceph. Yeah, the other maintainers, so Jared and Bassam, they decided to start another startup. They like the startup world a little more than me, I guess. And so they started Upbound at that point about 3 years ago. And that's where they still are. And they're still contributing to Rook. Well, Bassam is officially an emeritus maintainer. He's busy with Upbound, but Jared is still contributing, participating in discussions and things, still interested in making sure Rook continues and everything. So that's the relationship with Upbound. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're How interesting. And we have Quantum in some ways to thank for the gift of Rook, and you, Travis, and Bassam and Jared, and all of you for shepherding it this far. Tell us about the decision to go into the CNCF and kind of the path within the CNCF. That seems to be an increasingly kind of common and important part of an open source project's lifecycle.
Right. I think pretty early, as we went to KubeCon and started down the path of the operator, we realized that, hey, the CNCF, it was a pretty new organization at that point, but it was kind of shepherding all these projects that were being built for Kubernetes. So it's like, well, we built this thing for Kubernetes. Let's go down that path. It gives more community adoption. The community has more confidence in these projects that are showing that they're following security best practices and running in production and have good open source practices and governance. And so we wanted to go down that path to really build the community and build the community's trust in the project. So we started, Sandbox was a long time ago, like 4 years ago, and then incubation and graduation just happened last fall, where we finished all the last things, crossed our T's and dotted our I's, got the sign off.
And the significance there is you get a bit more. It's signaling to the community that you're at CNCF level quality of community development, governance, security, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's a good testament to that the CNCF board believes, the TOC believes in the project. They see those good qualities in the project itself, and an important part of that lots of people are running it in production. There's proof of that, and people were willing to give us their testimonies or their stories.
Yeah,
what's the right thing? Yeah.
So you in some ways you've kind of arrived, right? I mean, it's now your CNCF graduated. Rook has a home with a whole community. Does your role change? Are you now kind of a cog in the community wheel, or do you still have a kind of driving force in the vision?
Yeah, vision-wise, I feel like that's a good question. Well, it's like we graduated, so what is next with the CNCF and the community, right? I feel like that's just kind of a stamp of approval on this journey that we're already making and isn't going to change much anyway. We're providing storage that's reliable for the community to build on, and we just keep adding features. Like Ceph keeps adding features, and then Rook needs to add or expose those features to Kubernetes through these DRDs. It's always fixing bugs, and there's always more features to add as people are expanding their usage, expanding the scenarios. It's just an ever-growing project, and I keep being amazed actually by how much more there's always to do. It's not like we'll ever finish the project. It just keeps going and going, and people keep using it more and more.
And so, I mean, when do we get to declare victory on storage for Kubernetes? Is it now solved? I think for some time over the last few years, it's been kind of in limbo. Where do you see it at today, Travis? Is it time for us to move all of our production databases to a Kubernetes-powered, Rook-powered storage solution?
I'd love to see that, of course. That's my vision.
Right.
Right. I'd say there's still so much more to do. There's always gaps. Like we're looking at next, for example, Windows clients coming into Kubernetes, right? Well, so Ceph is looking at adding support for Windows clients and things like that.
But there was a time when we debated whether Kubernetes should be stateful or should support stateful workloads. and that debate's over, right? We've kind of decided there's a place, if not a real opportunity for Kubernetes to shine in the capacity that Rook is running.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many different ways to run it too. Somebody can dedicate the whole Kubernetes cluster to running the storage platform if they want and connect to it externally. They can run it alongside of their other applications in the same cluster. There's just so many different ways to configure it that it's like, yeah, most scenarios are covered. Whether it's perfect for all scenarios, I'll actually say it actually doesn't cover all scenarios, because I'll just give you one. So if a database must have data locality to a local disk, and it provides its own replication, or maybe it doesn't even want replication or data safety, right? It just wants highest possible throughput with no guarantees for data safety, then that's not what Rook and Ceph are about. Like, you just want to mount your local disk, and if it dies, it dies, and that's the application's problem. But yeah, but Ceph really gives you that durability and safe data safety, and that's the promise that people want.
Earlier, you mentioned that Ceph also has these different modes of operation, or you can do block, you can do file storage. You mentioned another. Are these also bubbled up in Rook? Rook is this kind of multimodal storage thing.
Right. Yeah. And it comes back to these CRDs as well. You tell Rook, hey, go configure these storage layers with these CRDs, and then Rook will enable those storage layers that you want. So you don't have to run extra things that you're not using. For example, if you're not using the file system, then we won't start that service up.
And so, what do your to kind of the users of Rook, are they building specialized, a database company or database offering might build on Rook, I presume, and they might spend quite a bit of time tuning everything so that things work as you might expect, coming from a traditional environment to this distributed Kubernetes one. Is that right? So you probably have pretty long engagements with and people will take a heavy dependency on you, and so this is an ongoing relationship, I imagine, with some of your users.
Yeah, and I'd say that close relationship is more of a downstream relationship that I'm not engaged in as much. So the upstream community really is about, we answer questions about getting it going, and people do have tuning questions, but I think if you really want to tune Ceph to get every bit out of it, that's not my area of expertise. Like, there are Ceph experts who would get in there, and Red Hat has a support team to help you go do that. So that's kind of more of at that level, you'd get into downstream version of Ceph and Rook to let you tune it. Well, you can tune it if you can figure it out, but whether you can get to that level of tuning on your own, maybe some people can, and it works well for them. I don't hear a lot of chatter, though, honestly, about needing to tune it for performance, because people find that it works pretty well out of the box if you get the right hardware behind it.
And now tell us what it's like being doing kind of corporate open source. So you have the pleasure of doing open source on Quantum's dime and now on Red Hat's dime. How does that and the Ceph team that you joined has been doing this for a decade, it sounds like. So you have even a certain amount of the feeling of job security here. Like, you could keep doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, I love open source. When I was at Microsoft and earlier in my career, I didn't do open source. It was proprietary. But so the open source way, when we started at Quantum, it was interesting because Quantum didn't have an open source philosophy. We kind of were leading the way for the company there. So when I joined Red Hat, I got a completely different perspective on that, because Red Hat's philosophy is fundamentally open source first, upstream community first, and then downstream products follow. So like in my day job now for Red Hat, I mean, my purpose, or what I'm supposed to do, is make sure the community stays happy with Rook, that upstream we're solid, we're fixing things, we're getting done what needs to get done. Like, that is my official job, to keep Rook going. And I do spend some time on downstream discussions to say, oh, well, because we do have a product, a Red Hat, that we ship on top of Rook. But that's not really I need to support that for my job, right? But it doesn't take a lot, or not majority of my time by any means.
Yeah, is that a separate person or group's responsibility? The productizing of Rook?
Right. Yeah, there's the productizing team, like there's the PM team and the QE to make sure it's good quality. Like, and that's one difference about the upstream versus the downstream product. I mean, upstream, we don't have a QE team that officially signs off on our releases. We make them the highest quality we can, and we trust our CI processes and automatic tests to make sure the quality stays there. But at the end of the day, we don't have a QE team that signs off upstream, and that's something downstream that is there to make sure things are solid. But I feel like
that's what you're paying for,
right? I feel like we have such reliable processes upstream after this long now, so about 5 years having it iterate. Where we really do have good success with our releases, I feel like, and that quality.
That's fantastic. In the case that, as we wrap up here, Travis, in the case that we have listeners who are excited about Rook and want to get involved, is there a place where the community hangs out?
Yeah, we have a Slack group for Rook. So go to slack.rook.io to join there. And on GitHub, you can find us at github.com/Rook. And of course, our website, rook.io.
Good. Anything I didn't cover today we wanted to get through?
Sometimes people ask, where does Rook come from? Why do we have that name? Right.
Right. Yeah. Tell us.
So it is kind of interesting. So back when we were at Quantum, we had a code name for our storage solution, which is called Castle, because a castle is somewhere that is safe, and you want to keep your data safe if you store it in a castle, right? So data safety around Castle, and that's where it started. But then it turns out, because of some copyright or whatever, we couldn't use Castle as the product name. So we thought, how can we use our same logo that looks like a castle? And so we came up with Rook, and rook.io was available, and it's a nice short word that people can pronounce and type, and it's like, hey, that just worked perfectly. So that's where Rook
they're very good.
from.
Yeah. Sometime we'll have to talk about how most open source logos are pretty lousy, but you got a nice thing going on there at Rook.
Oh,
the logo, the name, the website, very good.
Yeah, we had a designer with the team. He's at Upbound now. So if you look at Upbound Designs, it's the same guy. He creates good stuff.
Yeah. Travis, thanks for coming out today. Your contribution and Bassam and Jared's to Rook is awesome, inspiring, and paves the way for a lot of future distributed stuff.
Yeah, excited to be with you and talk a little bit about it, or maybe too much. I don't know.
You can find today's show notes and past episodes at contributor.fyi. Until next time, I'm Eric Anderson, and this has been Contributor.